Welcome back to the Crypto Clown World podcast. I'm your host with the honks, Jason Bruce. It's the 11th of May, 2024. And as usual, we've got a lot going on. At the top of the show, as always, I have my co-host here with me, Mr. Christopher Lundy. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, Jason. Thanks again for having me on and for blessing me with your presence on your show. It's great to be here, to be part of this show for sure.
I appreciate that, man. I always appreciate you being here. It's always eye-opening, and it definitely kind of keeps me in tune with things that I'm not always necessarily following because I'm either just in the charts or engrossed in family life or just trying to, keep up with everything else. So I I kind of rely on you for the news cycle at this point, so no pressure, man. Um, with all that said, I know you've got a lot of talking points this week. I don't have a lot of TA because honestly, we're pretty much like right back where we started the show last week. Bitcoin had like a little ride up to about 65 and a half, and it's just sitting like right around 61, I think, like right around the time of recording here, maybe just below. So I'm going to hand it over to you and we'll see what's going on. I know there's, as always, a lot of stuff, not just in the crypto world, but in the entire world that people kind of need to be aware of that can potentially affect markets and, lives and everything else. So we're not just crypto here on the podcast. We do want to bring you more information. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, and let me know what's going on, man.
Well, top of the show is the Oracle of Omaha, as they call him, Warren Buffett. Um, I'm not going to go too much into his background. Most people know who he is. So Mr. Buffett is currently hoarding approximately $188 billion in cash and short-term treasury bills at a 5.4% interest rate. Now, why is this important? Well, anytime that you see Warren Buffett hoarding record amounts of cash as the Fed raises rates, there's going to be a stock market crash within a year. And that's happened every single time that Warren Buffett has really ramped up his treasury bill holdings. It has happened 3 times in the last 25 years, starting in 2000, and the record high right before the 2008 tech bubble was a little over, or somewhere in between 10 to 15 billion dollars, excuse me. Just before the 2008 crash, it was in between 40 to 42 billion. Before the 2020 repo, that was around 150 billion, and now we're at 188. So, and with each stack, it just continuously gets higher and higher and higher. Prior to 2000, this cash pile was, barely a trickle on the chart, and it's been up and to the right ever since 2000. So that should tell you a lot about how, folks are taking advantage of these crises, and that they know precisely when these movements are coming in. This is what insider information gives you. Moving on to some brief economic data, and this is prices for three-course meals, and this is actually geopolitically significant. And this is at a mid-range restaurant. This is the average price for a three-course meal for 2 people at a mid-range restaurant priced in U.S. dollars. And we're going to rattle off the top 10 different examples from around the world. Clocking in first is New York City at $130, L.A., Los Angeles at $120, Ottawa at $100, Chicago at $90, Montreal, Quebec, $89, Toronto, Ontario, $81, Houston, Texas, $77, Mexico City, Mexico, $58, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, $36, Buenos Aires, Argentina, $26. Well, the last two on that list really stuck out to me because historically, Argentina has been very inexpensive for American tourists due to its many currency crises. Um, that said, uh, the Argentinian peso has begun stabilizing a bit. Some detractors are stating that it is because of state capture and an aggressive cutting of the welfare state. Others are hailing the current administration for it. I'll leave it to the viewer and the listener to decide who to believe on that one. But this is also another example of Greecification, where it's very cheap for an American tourist to go there, very, or if in some cases impossibly expensive for somebody that's in that zone, such as Japan or Argentina, to actually leave that country to engage in similar activities due to the significant devaluing of the currencies. And I would expect to see more wild currency fluctuations as a result of that, especially as it relates to Japan. And we'll discuss Japan later in the talking points. More economic data as well. And this is source for this is the OECD. The average hours worked per year in the European Union is 1,571. In the United States, it's 1,811. So if we subtract those numbers, that's quite a bit. Yeah, that's 250 hours, something like this, or 240 hours, roughly speaking. Yeah, 240 hours. So what does that equate to? 6 weeks. That means that in the United States, there's 1.5 months more worked here than there is in the European Union. So what does that mean? Well, that means a few things. One, there's differences in policy in terms of leave, in terms of social benefit in the European Union as a result of the Marshall Plan, which arguably is being dismantled as we speak due to this saber rattling with Russia, but it's gone far beyond saber rattling at this point. So those hours worked, I expect them to go down because anytime you have wars that have a risk of spreading, that typically leads to industries collapsing and higher unemployment. And speaking of higher unemployment, uh, there's a report today that was released by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis that indicated that in 2022, 33% of all Americans between the ages of 18 and 24, 33% of them had no income at all from any source. This is very significant youth unemployment. This is just with income, right? You can consider even higher figures than that if you're talking about underemployment. So I expect this number to go down, not because the economy will get better, but because we're going to have a full employment labor crisis based upon the declining populations as a result of the health issues as it relates to the inoculations that have come out. So expect labor statistics and the health data to have an inverse correlation because those charts are heading in opposite directions. Moving on. Wanted to cover a type of attack that many are not aware of. Experienced crypto users may be aware of them, but it's called address poisoning. It's a type of attack against a crypto holder to trick them into sending crypto into a wallet destination that looks like the wallet they intend to send it to, but it's actually an attacker's wallet. So what will happen is and this is most common on ETH based networks, you'll send a transaction to someone, and what will happen is you will get a a shortened address that will have like the first four characters and the last four characters, and you look at it and think that it's fine. Always check the full length of every address before you send. It may take more time, but if you're sending large amounts of cryptocurrency, don't just hit send. Always do test transactions. That way, if you lose, you aim small, you miss small. So, yeah, kind of like archery. So just keep an eye open for that. Now we're going to dig into the geopolitics. So on May 5th, there were various Russian OSINT sources that were, and this is in relation to last week's show. They flew to the capital of Niger and Niamey, and they delivered cargo, which included ammunition and other equipment. And according to the National Council for Defense of Niger, this is the third visit of a Russian transport worker to this region. So significant military ties are being formed between Niger and Russia. And this tells me two things. One, Russia is looking to stabilize West Africa, and two, is also looking to use it as a counterweight to what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean. Uh, and in fact, all U.S. troops have been ordered to withdraw from Niger by the Secretary of Defense of the United States. So that withdrawal is taking place as we speak. But this is significant because this could have resulted in a direct clash, especially with Russian troops ordering American troops out. Russian troops and military posture towards America is becoming more hostile due to provocations. And historically, Russia usually goes from 0 to 100 whenever it is dealing with adversaries. So it is not surprising to see that. Back to a bit of economic data. This interested me because I'm very interested in Southeast Asia right now because there's lots of outmigration from China and outmigration from other larger economies into mid-level economies throughout Southeast Asia and some tax havens. So how is this reflected? Well, it's in the prospective GDP per capita, and this is based on IMF data, and this is expected GDP per capita growth between now and 2028. So essentially over the next 4 years. Indonesia's GDP is expected to go up by 31%, Thailand by 25%, Malaysia by 24%, and Singapore by 17%. So this tells me that people in Southeast Asia from larger economies such as India and China are looking for less expensive locales with uh, better use cases for their lives. I have seen significant outmigration from China to Thailand, especially, and that's happened, and that's picking up the pace, especially over the last year, uh, as China's economy continues to worsen. As I mentioned in the previous show, China's overall underemployment rate, or as it relates to companies suffering from staff shortages, was around 69% of the entire economy. So, anytime you see those types of issues, outmigration and voluntary migration tends to go up. Now we're going to get back into the campus protests a bit. George Washington University, GW, is in Washington, D.C. Her president, Ellen Granberg, gave a statement stating, and I quote, "We have offered an alternative demonstration site, requested the assistance of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, erected barriers to contain the protest, initiated academic and administrative consequences for trespassing GW students." Of course, they're mentioning trespassing GW students. How can a student trespass in their own space, right? What they're doing is they're setting up zones and kettling people, and that is something that was very similar to what happened during the Vietnam War protests. Only in this particular case, we've got campuses that are outfitted with electronic locks and cameras on in every hallway across every building. So it's a completely different type of setup. But thus far, all these efforts have failed to end the encampment. And as the university, she stated, as a university, they're not equipped to single-handedly manage an unprecedented situation such as this. So they're essentially conceding defeat. But there hasn't really been any offers of meeting the protesters halfway, so we'll keep an eye on that. George Washington University has very heavy ties to the DC establishment, so it's not surprising that the response from them has been so, uh, shall we say, direct and in their face. But there's big news from China that I hadn't mentioned in last week's show, and this is from a Bloomberg report. China's number one investment bank, CICC, it's basically China's version of Goldman Sachs, has demoted many of their senior bankers and has cut pay to slash costs. Whenever you have a very large financial institution slashing pay, that's a very bad sign, because even here in the United States during the 2008 financial crisis, there were people that lost their jobs. That's true. But the profits still continued to go up for these banks because they were simply consolidating uh, in the larger, broader sense during the last crash. So expect to see regional and large investment institutions in China start to experience significant financial stress. Moving on. Going into the Levant again, and we're going to be covering this a lot because this is the number one geopolitical issue across the world. Everyone's talking about it. So there has been a fourth stage operational escalation, as I reported last week, in regards to um, the blockade of the Mediterranean Sea that Ansar Allah of Yemen has announced. They have stated that any ship that reaches um, any Israeli port and breaks Sana'a's ban will make all other ships operated by the same firm a target. So what they're saying is that if any of them actually get through, then they're going to attack their entire fleets. So this is going to have a very significant disruption to global supply chains because it's going to have knockoff effects, including towards intended targets that may not be intended targets. Because whenever you have these types of blockades, even the people who are trying to assist are going to be affected by it as well. And the Israeli army also took control over the Rafah crossing, so there's no way to get aid in uh, unless the IDF permits it to go into any of those entry points along the Gaza Strip border with Egypt or anywhere else. Moving on to some pretty significant news about the inoculation. The EU has stopped approval for AstraZeneca's COVID-19 inoculation. So, and it was interesting because AstraZeneca actually requested that it be withdrawn. And there's been a pretty significant pushback in EU Parliament by Christine Anderson, but she found, unsurprisingly, very few standing up for her in her defense. So now that that has been exposed, it was actually AstraZeneca that requested the EU do it. So um, this, in my opinion, is a face-saving exercise, but there's not going. There's already a committee of inquiry has been called for, and Ms. Anderson has openly stated that anybody that's against it is most likely to be amongst the perpetrators of that particular situation, especially considering the text message scandal with Ursula von der Leyen between her and Albert Bourla in regards to negotiations of these inoculation contracts, where 11 inoculations are purchased per European citizen, which is quite high, of course. So, moving on to another geopolitical issue in relation to the Levant. An open letter was signed by several U.S. senators. I'm going to name all of the senators that signed this letter, and the senators are as follows: Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Katie Boyd Britt, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Senator Ted Budd, Kevin Cramer, Ted Cruz, Bill Haggerty, Marco Rubio, Pete Ricketts, Rick Scott, and Tim Scott. And they wrote to Mr. Kareem Khan, who is is in the office of the prosecutor to the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands. And they state at the end, and I'll just summarize the final paragraph and I'll say it verbatim, quote, "The United States will not tolerate politicized attacks by the ICC on our allies. Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with the measures indicated in the report, we will move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and associates, and bar you and your families from the United States. You have been warned." Close quote. So this is an open threat to a judicial institution that was previously lionized by many of these same people whenever they issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. So my take on this is that this is much ado about nothing and merely political maneuvering as a way to use that as a public relations message board, because no actual orders are going to be able to be followed or applied with in a practical manner, because neither Israel or the United States are party to the Rome Statute. So how that is going to play out going forward is likely to play out other than through court proceedings, at least in the short term. Getting back into crypto, MetaMask, which has rolled out a smart transactions feature to combat Ethereum front running. Now, I don't recommend that. I don't encourage anyone to use MetaMask due to its heavy surveillance and It records your IP address and it essentially follows your wallet around the internet. But if you do still use MetaMask, look into this smart transactions feature. Have a look at it, and it will. It is purported to help to prevent extreme slippage. That seems to be the selling point, because that's been a huge problem with anybody using DeFi protocols on ETH-based pseudo decentralized exchanges, and I call MetaMask pseudo decentralized because of its heavy surveillance. Back to geopolitics. We did cover Japan briefly last year, but in the last 3 years, the Japanese yen has devalued against the US dollar by more than 30%. Now, the yen, since 2008, the yen has lost 75% of its value against gold. 75%. And because of Japan's high reliance on imports, this loss of purchasing power has translated directly into a substantially lower standard of living for the Japanese people, as mentioned in last week's show. But theoretically, Japan could support the yen by raising interest rates, but it's a political and monetary and fiscal impossibility due to what happened with Russia cutting off their fuel. They don't have any way to practically use cheap energy to get a real economic situation going anymore. So the new global system is starting to take shape before our eyes, and belligerent countries are going to find out the hard way that if they engage in proxy warfare against powerful adversaries, they're going to have a very hard time, and so are their populations. And since Japan is a strategic midpoint between Russia and the United States, this is highly likely intended to weaken that position and, convince the Japanese to come to an agreement with the Russians. And let's not forget the Russo-Japanese War during World War II, which was a very difficult conflict for the Soviet Union. Nowhere near as difficult as Operation Barbarossa, but still a difficult one. So let's move on. In terms of Ireland, there are plenty more divestments that are taking place from Israel and Israeli institutions. Now, after approximately 4 days of protests at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, they have publicly stated that they will pull their investments in Israeli companies that feature an UN blacklist, and will set up a task force to explore engagement with Israeli institutions. So these look more like promises than actual actions. So these may simply be bargaining tactics to end the protests. The follow through will be interesting to see. Now, back in terms of crypto, Exodus Wallet it made an announcement in the past week that they were going to list on the New York Stock Exchange and tokenize their listing on the Algorand blockchain. And it received widespread fanfare, but the SEC stepped in and said, we're not going to permit this listing. It's going to go under review. So it's a non-news event at this point. I'm not going to cover it in any degree of detail because of the SEC putting the brakes on it, but it's worth looking into and having a look at. Exodus has been probably one of the most prominent and popular wallets in the space due to its excellent user interface and consistent development. So keep an eye on that. There's also a hack, back to geopolitics, of the UK Ministry of Defense, where data of officials and active military personnel was successfully stolen. There were conflicting reports as to who the responsible parties were. China was blamed. It's possible it was China. It could be anybody. It's hard to say. But that has taken place, at least officially confirmed by the UK Ministry of Defense. Also, Volodymyr Zelensky had an assassination plot foiled, and 2 colonels within his military apparatus were arrested. OSINT feed suggests that it was a Western-backed plot to usher him out to bring someone else in. But that's a rumor. It's hard to say. As for other financial news, there's been a public warning from the BRICS News Telegram channel. Not Telegram, excuse me, but Twitter X profile, to prepare for a US dollar collapse. So this could be fear mongering, or it could be a warning to citizens of the West to take appropriate measures. But on this show, we're always advising taking appropriate measures, gold, silver, crypto. Make sure that you're adequately diversified, have a cash position, hold on to it. It's going to be very important to have. And speaking of cash, as it relates to Monero, both local Monero and Agora Desk have decided to shut down. I'm not going to go into all the details because this has been commonly passed throughout the crypto community. But what I will say is the regulation by enforcement bull in a China shop attitude to the SEC is starting to intimidate certain uh, sectors of the self custody and direct P2P space that are centralized apparatuses rather than decentralized. And from my perspective, this was to protect the users of the service from having their assets seized or somehow shuttered. So they went ahead and took care of that. I would recommend getting your funds off of there before the end of next week. Uh, the deadline to get your funds out is November 7th, 2024. The website will be taken down. Any funds from your arbitration bond wallet prior to that date, you have to reclaim them, or the funds will be considered to be abandoned and they will keep them. So get your funds out now. Don't wait until the last minute. Get them out today. Moving on. Now, as it relates to the SEC, the House did a vote to erase all of the SEC's crypto policy authority, essentially kicking the SEC out of the crypto industry. President Biden has vowed to veto it, has not yet gone to the Senate. So we'll see how that develops. Back to Israel. The area of Galilee, which is at the northeastern areas of Israel, which is former Syrian territory in what was originally a demilitarized zone, has openly declared its intention to secede from the Israeli state, citing a lack of protection from the Israelis. And this announcement made me scratch my head because if they're going to secede, they're still going to be considered belligerents, and they're going to have to cut a deal with another Arab world country for formal protection. But what will that look like, and what will the conditions be? And will the conditions be favorable for the citizens of the state? That remains to be seen. So this was announced after there was an expression of discontent with the Israeli government from within officials of Galilee to the war in the north. They've stated that their businesses, their public life, tourism, life is dead. Hundreds of thousands have fled and more continue to flee. In fact, Kiryat Shimona was bombarded with heavy rocket fire, and much of the town and the surround was engulfed in flames for the better part of a day. So far as I know, it's still burning as we speak. So this looks to be an act of desperation to stop the conflict, and I expect this movement to spread. But if this is a successful move, it will be the official confirmation that Israel is in the process of balkanizing, and that will create some significant fragmentation within that society. So let's keep your eyes open on that. And as it relates to the relationships between Turkey and Israel, Israeli media purported that Turkey has approved renewal of exports to Israel after last week's ban. However, Turkey has stated that the approval is temporary only and only for factories that have already worked with Israel. So this is to protect their own industries within the country. How effective this will be is unclear uh, because of the naval blockade. So this is going to be a confusing factor because it's going to potentially lead to Turkish ships being targeted by Ansar Allah unless they use a land route. So what land route they'll use, it's hard to say. I don't know if there is going to be a land corridor. So this will be an interesting development to watch. There could be backroom deals between them and Ansar Allah. It's hard to say. But Turkey is going to be in the crosshairs of the Israelis at some point if they do end up uh, moving with more assertiveness towards the situation that's happening there. And moving on to Egypt, there was an assassination of an Israeli businessman who's later revealed to be a Mossad agent, by the name of Ziv Kaidar, and he was tracked and his phone was hacked by the martyr Muhammad Salah, also known as Vanguards of Liberation. This is the group in question, which is purported to be a Muslim Brotherhood affiliated group, had claimed responsibility for the assassination operation and later released a video of the operation on various OSINT feeds. And this is significant because Egypt previously stated that they would tear up the Camp David Accords with Israel if there was a ground or air assault on Rafah in Gaza, and that has not taken place. So I suspect that there may be a dangerous potential rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt again. The problem right now is Egypt is undergoing essentially an economic Great Depression. They have a severely depressed economy, and many are resorting to blackmailing, bribing, and stealing. Some are even being bribed to go and attack other communities within Egypt. So there is an atmosphere of desperation within the country, but there are still people within the country that have a willingness to engage militarily, and that has a dangerous potential for escalation. So keep an eye open on that. And there's another announcement from the Kremlin and from the Ministry of Defense of Belarus that they began joint preparations for exercises to alert non-strategic nuclear weapons. And this is in relation to Vladimir Putin's announcement directed towards Poland that if they hosted U.S. nuclear weapons, they would be instantly attacked. So they are this is a show of force to double down and say, back off. And it appears that the West is starting to get the message. There does not appear to be a lot of appetite for escalation, especially considering the rapidly changing realities on the Ukrainian battlefield. Now, I wanted to briefly cover also something from the U.S. economy and as it relates to California's budget crisis. Now, California, over the course of the last 10 years, but especially much more so over the last 2 or 3, has suffered a significant outflow of both population and businesses as a result of their high tax regimes, their brutal lockdowns, and their discriminatory policies towards people that simply did not want to have unnecessary interventions on their person. So what's going on right now? To give some context, in 2022, the state of California had a record budget surplus of approximately $97.5 billion. But now, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, the surplus has plummeted to a record budget deficit of $73 billion, which is astounding. That shows you just how much of an impact economically these policies have made on California's economy. And balancing the budget will not just be challenging, it will be because the state can't just drive up debt. They can't roll it over. They can't kick the can down the road, because there was an act passed 20 years ago called the California Balanced Budget Act, and it requires the state legislature to pass a balanced budget every year. So they've got 3 options: raise taxes, cut programs, or form a state bank. And it looks like there are efforts to form a state bank similar to the State Bank of North Dakota model, which holds all the state's deposits and cuts out Wall Street middlemen, which used to be the standard way that banking operated on the state government level in the United States for many years prior to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. So there appears to be a movement back towards state sovereign budget control, not because of a desire to bring more economic opportunities to the population, but out of necessity, because at some point, if economies get too much worse, there's going to be significantly worse results. And as we go back into crypto, there's a couple more stories about, there's 3 more. And I wanted to touch on a situation in Armenia that I've been following that hasn't really borne any fruit just yet, but has been a tinderbox waiting to explode, and looks like it's going to be the next proxy front in relation to what's happening with Gaza. Now, for some historical reference, Armenians have been present in Jerusalem slash Al Quds since the 4th century, roughly speaking. And that would be around the time of the establishment of the Byzantine Empire. And that would have been around 330 AD. So in 330 AD, that was the establishment of the Byzantine Empire. And Armenian Christians were present in Jerusalem, which was at that time a Byzantine city. Uh, as a result of their presence, they built the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. So there are very close ties between Armenian Palestinians as well as native Armenians in their home country. Uh, and the Archbishop of the Armenian Orthodox Church, his name is Bagrat Galstanyan, has demanded the resignation of the prime minister, head of state of Armenia. His name is Nikol Pashinyan. And this was as of May 9th, so it was 2 days ago. They gave him 1 hour to resign, and the Archbishop stated, and I quote, "I am ready to meet within 1 hour and discuss all the conditions of departure. You no longer have any form of authority in the Republic of Armenia," close quote. Now, Armenia's Republic Square is, at that time, 2 days ago, was filled to capacity with protesters who have joined a, quote, "tavush for the homeland," close quote, movement, and are against the unilateral surrender of Armenian lands. Now, this surrender of Armenian lands was um, the relationship between a very short, limited war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, Azerbaijan is essentially a client state of shock troops to keep the Armenians at bay. They were involved in the Armenian genocide after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So there appear to be old scores that are coming back up to be settled in the southern Black Sea coast regions. So that is going to be something I pay attention to. 2 more talking points for today. And these are both crypto related, so we're going to finish off on some crypto stuff today. Now, the ETH supply is growing at its fastest daily rate since the merge. The amount of fees burned has plummeted following the Denkun or Densun upgrade. I don't know how to pronounce that. Forgive me. But median transaction fees were positively correlated with network activity and spiked as total daily transactions approached approximately 6 million. And median transaction fees remain at low levels even with higher network activity. So the upgrade appears to have, at least in thesis, based upon this chart, reduced the high fee problems of ETH, at least short term. After the merge, there did not appear to be very much correlation there. But since the supply is going up significantly, essentially inflation is being used as the mechanism to suppress the price. Inflation of the supply of Ethereum. And that's what happens with the proof of stake and imminent centralization risk. And last talking point of the day is it was discovered that BlackRock has used Tornado Cash. BlackRock's, I think it's the BlackRock Bitcoin wallet, was flagged as a Tornado Cash recipient. And this is very significant, ladies and gentlemen, because the founders of Tornado Cash got arrested, right? And so since they got arrested, does that mean that BlackRock is going to be a part of this too? Because they have a significantly higher market cap than some, much smaller market cap, crypto mixer service that was simply just a way for people to trade between one crypto and another. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the regulation by enforcement situation is starting to show its hand and say the quiet part out loud. is that the people that are calling the shots for these types of prosecutions are BlackRock themselves. And I expect to see more scandals coming around about BlackRock and especially JP Morgan. And there's another thing I wanted to remind the audience about, and this will be my last talking point, I promise, is that the FDIC has openly stated that they are imminently preparing for the failure of a major Wall Street bank. Which one? It's hard to say. Of them, I say the riskiest of them is Wells Fargo. And I say that because of their fake account scandal where they were opening credit card accounts, sometimes dozens of them without client knowledge or requests or participation and those sorts of things. So uh, uh, there was also a situation where their money transmitter license was threatened to be shut down by the Federal Reserve if they didn't stop bilking their customers so hard. So there was definitely a tug of war behind the scenes between the Fed and Wells Fargo in terms of their malfeasance. That was later discovered and proven in court. So I expect that Wells Fargo is going to undergo some pretty significant stress, but there's no indication that it's Wells Fargo. It could be someone else. It was a rather nondescript and nebulous announcement, but we've got a topsy-turvy world, ladies and gentlemen. If you hold on to your hats, so you'll be okay. Just stay prepared, keep keep at it, and those are all my talking points for today, Jason. And I'd be even though you don't have a lot of content, I'd be interested to see your technical analysis because I have been looking at Robert Klondike's charts on spot and leverage trades for Bitcoin. There's some good opportunities for dollar cost averaging, but it looks like 60K support in Bitcoin looks pretty solid. Chances of it breaking down aren't that high, but if it does, I saw pretty good buy zones in between 57 and 55K, and I put some low ball buy orders in that zone. It looks like a pretty good demand zone, so I am confident that it's a possible zone where I could get some trades filled. I'd be interested to see your thoughts on that. I'll hand it over to you, sir.
I appreciate it as always, man. Uh, Absolutely wild what's going on in our world. So thank you as always for opening our eyes to that. And, you know, as far as this Bitcoin price goes, I want to say that it wants to dig itself out, but I just don't like the nature of this flag that we're in on the 4 hour. In terms of the buy zones that you were talking about, if we were to come back down and like have a double bottom scenario, that 57 area is definitely an area of interest. 55 to me seems like it might be a volume gap though. And if we lose this area, there are a few smaller areas of support if we like move out to the daily. And there is this smaller node here like around, just below 55. So there is some support there, but if you look here, this is kind of a volume gap area. You got this large node, you volume gap down. Your next real area of interest to me is going to be around 50K, maybe a little bit lower. So 50K region. And then there's also this area of interest here. You can see a huge amount of volume here. This was where the ETF came in. So I would expect strong support in the 40 to 48K region. If for any reason we lose this area around 52 to 50K area. I don't want to get too bearish right now, but that's just kind of where things are lining up. You can also see this 2.618 fib retracement is in line with this point of control for the accumulation for the ETF. So right now we're going to have to watch divergences on smaller time frames, see if anything's unfolding. That's going to be what would give us any type of a bullish picture. I could potentially still extrapolate out this head and shoulders as long as we hold this level. So I'll bring that down just a little bit, and we'll try and keep our hopes up for that with what the stochastics are doing. But we need the RSI back above the 50 level on the 4 hour. We need this bullish divergence to hold, which to me it's not that strong because it didn't reset below this oversold territory where we would typically like to see that. So we saw this last one here kind of gave us that move up, but I'll try and stay neutral for right now. But retested the 200 daily moving average is just above 50K. So that would be a healthy retest area. You got the 200 weekly. I believe I highlighted that on the last podcast, around 34,000. I would be hesitant to go in too hard on, you know, buying right now. If you're dollar cost averaging, with a longer term outlook for, at least in the next year, you should be okay. But I'm not aggressively buying right now myself. If we take a look at Bitcoin dominance, this is actually kind of waffling a little bit. It looks like it's potentially trying to drop here. And this is on the 5-day chart, so this is a larger scale. Might see a retest of the 200 weekly if this continues in a bearish fashion for the Bitcoin dominance. If we look at the Tether dominance, this is kind of starting to flag out a little bit on the 4-hour. We're seeing this green candle come in. Stochastics look a little odd. Let's back out here a little bit, and we're just coming up on the daily close here too, so we'll assume that's on the books. And this is kind of an indecisive candle here. Certainly indecisive in terms of the selling. Indicators are kind of indecisive. Let's see here. This 12-hour looks like it can push, though. We'll have to keep a close eye on the Tether dominance. The more I zoom out, see this 3-day candle is bullish. That 3-day candle is pushing bullish. If we move out to say like a weekly, this is actually just moving into a position of strength above the 21 MA on the weekly. So even though your RSI is pretty overbought, your stochastic RSI, excuse me, this could have more momentum. See, when I like move out to a 2-week, this tells me that we're going to come up and test these areas. You might come up and form an inverse head and shoulders here. I'm going to draw that in right now. Something like that in line with the 21 MA. Kind of slop that up there, but that would be something that I would look for Tether dominance. I'm going to move over to total 3. This doesn't look good for the altcoins. You're kind of losing strength on the stochastics in oversold territory. You're pointing down on the RSI, printing a bearish candle here after a weak buying candle, and you can see you're bouncing up against the 21 MA on this 4-hour for the altcoins. Just doesn't look strong. It just doesn't look strong to me. You could almost even call this an Adam and Eve double top. That would bump you back down to the 200 daily moving average, and you'd be looking at, a haircut for the altcoins of about 15% or so, 10 to 15%. So just jumping over to Ethereum real quick. Doesn't really look strong on smaller time frames. 4-hour isn't giving us much. This almost looks like a head and shoulders. Did that already break down, or does that have more? 200 daily, just below 2,700. 200 weekly is all the way down at about 2,000. So those are areas you could retest for Ethereum. Your next area of interest to the upside would be around just above this previous high, which is 4,100, 4,160 area. All right, so this broke down here, as you can see. Didn't quite hit the measured move, but that broke down. So I'm just not seeing the most bullishness in the market right now. The ETH BTC pair is retesting this bullish divergence on the daily. With the low stochastics, I really want to see this bullish divergence hold and a double bottom hold. If that doesn't, then I would look for significant drop. BNB is still hanging in here in the channel, but showing the same weakness that the rest of the altcoins are and the rest of the market. 4 hour doesn't look too bad. It actually looks a little bit better for BNB. Real quick, just altcoins to keep on your radar. Arrow, I'm going to be dollar cost averaging into this because my current average buy is $1.17. Aleph, you can buy this on Coinbase. I'm hearing a lot of talk about it. It may need to come back down a little bit. Look for a retest of this 200 daily or this point of control, somewhere between about 20 to 26 cents. Currently sitting at 38. May see a large drop for that. Could just see a retest of this area at the 21 MA and the breakout of this area. If it holds 34 cents, you're golden. And I'm still looking at AGI, the Delicium AI project. Potentially this is still in breakout and retest of this inverse head and shoulders. Your targets are up around 42 and 49 cents. That's all I've got this week, folks. Watch your bags. The market's getting a little choppy. As always, thank you for joining us on the way out. If you haven't, please honk the like button, get subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. We're going to be bringing you these podcasts every weekend. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Much love. God bless. This is Jason Bruce. This has been Crypto Clown World. Have a good weekend. Talk to you soon. And, oh yeah, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Later, folks.